This Sunday, we will be hearing two readings that have an interesting link together. We'll start off with a passage from Paul's letter to the Romans, where Paul talks about having gratitude, showing gratitude for the faith that we have received. And that will be followed immediately by a story from Matthew, where Jesus is calling the first apostles and sending them out into the world to preach peace. So it's the implicit idea of receiving faith, and out of gratitude for that life of faith, we show that forth in spreading the good news with the world around us. And that idea of acknowledging the love of Christ in our lives through service will go all through the entire worship service this Sunday. And a beautiful way to link those two ideas is this early American folk hymn tune, Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing. The words were actually composed in London at the end of the 18th century, but very quickly they crossed the Atlantic and took root here in America, and they were paired with different versions of that same melody. And sometimes that tune is called Fount, after the words, Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing, sometimes Nettleton, sometimes Pilgrim Women, believe it or not. It has a lot of different forms, and it went through a lot of different variations before it kind of settled on this very familiar version that we all know. But it comes from that folk tradition of hymns that were very popular in the early part of this country's history. And you can see that their hymnal layout was quite a bit different than ours. And yet it shows sort of the evolution of how hymnody in this country took root. We will also get a little pre-taste of that melody as the opening prelude on the organ and a beautiful setting by the contemporary American composer Aaron David Miller. So you'll hear that melody in a more fanciful organ guise at the beginning of the service before we launch into the rest of our hymnody for the service. And as I say, the rest of our hymnody will really talk about showing the love of Christ to the world around us in service. And one of the hymns that we will sing at communion is not something that we necessarily associate with that theme. For the Fruit of All Creation, Thanks Be to God, a hymn that's really beloved here at St. John's. This is a tune that was written for these words, and it talks about, we sing it oftentimes around Thanksgiving, around harvest times, and indeed the third verse starts off, for the harvests of the Spirit, thanks be to God. And the first verse very much does talk about the fruits of creation, about the fruit of the earth. But the second verse is also really seizes on this idea of receiving things, the fruits of the Spirit, and then showing forth in service in our lives. And that second verse, in the just reward of labor, God's will be done. In the help we give our neighbor, God's will be done. In our worldwide task of caring for the hungry and despairing, in the harvests we are sharing, God's will be done. And so again, it plays into this idea of gratitude being expressed through service. And then the choir will also be singing at that service a section, a movement from Felix Mendelssohn's oratorio Elijah, or St. Paul, where it talks about how lovely are the messengers that preach us the gospel of peace. So all through the service, we'll be hearing time and time again about how we can express the love of Christ that we have received with those around us. We hope that you will come and share with us in that love of Christ this Sunday